Welcome to the Children's Book Author Podcast. I'm your host, Eleanor Page. If you write for children, or it's always been your dream to, you're in the right place. As the children's book author, I'm on a quest to discover everything there is about writing, publishing, and marketing children's books, as well as how to supercharge my creativity, skyrocket my productivity, and absolutely everything else there is to know about how to be the best, so you can be too. Join me as I interview fabulous guests and become the children's book author. Welcome back to episode 23 of the podcast. Today's guest interview is with Jennifer Milius, who is a developmental editor and also a children's book author, and also runs the TufFish podcast. I guess the majority of what we spoke about today and why I called this episode Shine as a Podcast Guest is all about authors being on other people's podcasts. And it was a bit of a revelation to me because I run one. It's like, oh, me be on a podcast. Wow. Okay. Yes, that makes sense. And there are certain podcasts that are for parents or educators or even children. Even if it's for other authors at times, it can still really give you fantastic exposure. And the great thing about podcasts is that they're evergreen. They might be listened to forever and ever and ever. Well, I like to think that they will. Perhaps the person who made the podcast may choose to take them down one day, but nonetheless. And they make fantastic content that you can repurpose in all sorts of different ways. So I learned so much from Jennifer about this topic. Also, we did talk about her books and what inspired them, and a great deal about developmental editing too. So I know you'll learn a great deal from listening to today's podcast. On a different note, one of the challenges, I suppose, that I'd like to set you, that I have set myself, is listen back to each of the podcasts, or if you can't be bothered, from now on, when you listen to future podcasts, we gain so much inspiration and a ton of information from listening to podcasts. But if a podcast is just inspiration, then it may not be as useful as it could be. So the challenge that I've set myself, I actually have gone back and listened to every podcast so far, 22 episodes, on a little bit of fast play, so you don't have to re-listen to them as slow as you might the first time. I put them on, I think, 2 times speed. And I picked one action to do for every single podcast, just one action. Let's say after listening to today's podcast episode with Jennifer Milius, your action may be to make a list of potential podcasts and maybe to reach out to one and see how you go. This is actually taking a concrete step with the information. Otherwise, you'll turn into me. You'll be sitting there every episode complaining, you really should do school visits. You so should, but you never will, right? Hint, hint. Yes, I am hearing myself. And it's just about taking those action steps. Ask yourself as you listen to every podcast, what's 1 or 2 actions that I can take from what I've heard today, from the expertise of this person or author, sometimes not an author, but what can I actually do? And it has to be concrete action. Otherwise, you become a holder of all this knowledge, like a wisdom author, but you're not really progressing your career and yourself forward. So I'm working hard to do that. I challenge you to do the same thing. Lately, I've been lucky enough to do a fair amount of author mentoring, and it occurred to me that I've never actually mentioned it out loud on my podcast. So yes, I actually provide mentoring. That can be a variety of things, from people who want to self-publish and not knowing the process. I can mentor you through that process of self-publishing so that you don't make the same mistakes that I made when I first started doing it the long and painful, tedious way. And even people who may think they know how to self-publish, there's lots of kind of niggly little steps that you may not, for example, really know. And as I found them out and went back in time to catch them up, it kind of cost extra money because I had to redo files and things. For example, getting a cataloging in publication for your book. I didn't know what that is, for example, right? Maybe you've published and you don't know what it is either, possibly, but it's really important to have it. So little things like this. Also, I've often given author mentoring to people who get stuck in their manuscript, who just need another person to discuss things with, or are lacking productivity or direction. So many reasons where mentoring can be useful. And at the moment, I am having a special on. So it is 150 Australian dollars, which is actually so cheap for you American dollar people. I am so jealous. When I reverse that and pay for editing, I am paying 1.5 times the amount, which is so painful. But great investment. And if it feels right to you to work with me, then consider that my pitch to you. You can find out more about my author mentoring service and book in at elenapage.com. Just at the very top, press the store button, go to author services, and there you will see author mentoring, and you can book in if it feels right for you. Other than that, I have been busy writing the Magician's Academy still, just about to finish the first draft and then jump into edits. So I'm going to let you get to the episode now with Jennifer Milius. Enjoy it, take lots of notes, and be inspired to take action. What will be the one thing that you take action on after listening to this episode? Welcome back to the Children's Book Author Podcast with me, your host, Eleanor Page. And today I have, how many specials shall I use? I tend to use quite a lot, don't I? Maybe I'll go 11 specials, but I won't say them all out loud because that'll take too long. I have Jennifer Milius, also Jen. You can call her Jen if you ever get the privilege of working with her. I have a feeling she'll probably be run off her feet once this podcast goes to air. Jen is a children's book author herself. She has an amazing and wonderful series that I can't wait to talk about. She is a podcast host of the TufFish podcast that I was a guest on. So go check out that episode once it's released. And also, she is a developmental editor, so she knows story. And she's an expert on all things podcasting. So I just cannot wait to pick your brain, Jen. Welcome to the show today.
Thank you so much for having me, Elena. I am so excited that you're here. That I'm here.
And you got 11 specials. 11 specials. I don't know where I plucked 11 from. I think there's probably going to be like maybe at the end of the year, I'm going to have to do a tally of who got the most specials. So you got a lot.
Well, thank you. I am very honored. Thank you. I'm so glad to be here with you.
Well, I was lucky to come upon you because you actually stumbled upon me and asked me to be a guest on your podcast. So let's start there. It's probably not where you expected to start, but let's talk a bit about how, well, you asked me to be on your podcast, and my first reaction was, me be on a podcast? Oh, that's different. Do authors go on podcasts? Yeah. So let's talk about podcasting and your journey to podcasting first, and then we'll get to all things books afterwards. Does that feel good?
Sure.
So how did you end up starting a podcast? Where did that happen from?
Well, first off, my undergraduate degree is in journalism, communications journalism with an emphasis in PR. So there's been some kind of writing background. And when I started my business, it did start with the picture books that I've written. And then it morphed a little bit into a podcasting opportunity. And the TufFish Show is actually my third podcast. The first two really were about leadership development. One I interviewed or co-hosted with someone else, and one I tried by myself, like short, sweet, just bite-sized pieces. But then the TufFish Show came about because I just I really love getting to know people like you do and getting to know them, seeing what's going on. And with the writers, I believe that there's a message that they want to tell. It really doesn't matter what genre they're in. If it's, starting from being a business owner and wanting to create a book that augments their business, or they started from writing books and then the business evolves because they are writing books. But I wanted to have different authors, different representing different genres, different intentions on the show, and just hearing about the craft and the process and getting to know the writer. Because to me, without the writer, there are no books. So let's talk to the writer. And it just evolved because of a natural curiosity and a joy that I wanted to follow and see through.
So what have you discovered from speaking to so many people who either write or want to write? What are kind of the main things that jump at you about our sort of brain and personality and I guess limitations? Yeah, you'd probably, I don't know, do you get to hear both sides of that?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And one of the things I've noticed is that, I think writers can be a bit hard on themselves and asking, am I good enough? Who's going to read this? Who am I to write this story? Who am I to do this? And my perspective is absolutely yes, you can. And yes, you should. If it's in your heart, then find a way to do that and honor yourself and honor that story. And all of the interviews that I've done, they've showcased that. Even if they talked about having a little bit of a struggle of who am I, they still showed up. They still found a way. And that's the kind of thing that I wanted this show to bring about, is to create a form of community and a sense of belonging of, hey, you're not the only one. Come on over here and recognize there's other people who get it, and maybe you can learn from them, and maybe you can, see what something that someone else has done that you might not have realized was a possibility, and try it and experiment and see if that works for you. So, that was one of the biggest things, was recognizing so many people finding a way when they might have felt stuck and how they overcame it, and in different ways. And another big theme that I've heard about is really permission and grace. So, sometimes you need to give yourself permission that says, I'm going to try this new thing. Sometimes you need to give yourself permission to say, I need to take a break, or I need to walk away from this project and come back to it, or I need to take a break on social media and come back to it. So when you are open to giving yourself permission and the grace to accept that space, that also helps in your writing process, in your showing up when you're in your different spaces, whether they're in person or virtual, that all of that kind of comes through.
That's such strong advice. And it really is a process, isn't it? It's like, what I find about it is I never arrive. So I kind of, I'm like writing a new book at the moment. I'm like, I can't write. I'm not a writer. And everyone in the family is like, what are you even saying? Like, there's 20 plus books. And I'm like, what? No, I didn't. Did I write them? No, I don't even know what you're saying. Like, because it's like you've got to arrive again. It's like you forget everything that you were or did before. It's like everyone feels like I'm starting from scratch. And I'm like, is that just me? Am I the only person that does that?
No. I mean, I've heard the phrase new level, new devil, and I don't remember really where I've heard that specific phrase, but that's what I liken that to be. Like, when you are learning, you're a student and you are figuring out what that's about, whether it's writing a book or writing that particular book, or learning what that particular process might be, or once it's published, learning about how you do things to help market it, or how to position yourself, or how to develop certain things. Being an entrepreneur has definitely been an amazing journey that I have had to learn so much more than I didn't realize how much I would need to learn, because sometimes it's about a writing process. Sometimes it's about using a tool. Sometimes it's all of the above. So all of that comes through. So yeah, it's amazing. And when that new level approaches, it's because you mastered the previous level, in a sense. And so then you're moving on to the next one, but it's like, okay, I'm starting again, but you're starting again at a different spot. But yet there's still more to learn. And even if you've already been through it multiple times, like I have published 8 books, 7 of which were children's books. 1 was a co-authored leadership book. And actually an audiobook version of that is coming out in March of 2023. So I just became a narrator to my own book. And that was a new level for myself because I had never been an audiobook narrator, but something in me said, that would be fun. Let's try that. Was it challenging at times? Sure. Was it weird at times? Absolutely. Did I love it? Yes, because it was meaningful work and I'm so glad I did it. And it was a new level to try and to do. So, that's the biggest thing that I would think about that is like, yes, you're constantly learning and you've mastered, but then you're learning again. But I think that's a good thing.
So you're never going to get comfortable.
No,
well.
No, I really don't think you do. I tend to think that the biggest thing in being an entrepreneur, running your own business, and as a writer, you are running a business. And when you're doing that, there's so much you kind of learn that you realize that you need to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. And that's kind of hard at times.
Yeah. And also, a lot of people will say, oh, I want to be, traditionally published because I just want to write. That's the only bit I want to do. But in my head, I'm not traditionally published. I'll say yet. Maybe one day I will want to be. I don't know. Not so far. The itch has not arrived. Did I say that right? The itch has not arrived. And I don't think that it's as easy as I'm just a writer ever. In fact, like you still have to try to get your book published. So you're trying to sell each of your different writing things, which is a whole different challenge than someone who self-publishes it and puts it out there. And then you still do have to market, don't you? Do you?
Oh,
do you
absolutely.
Still have to market?
Oh, absolutely. And even if you choose to self-publish, if that's not something you've done before, or if that's not something you feel comfortable with, that's still another level that you're learning and working through. And so, yeah, I mean, to me, all of what it takes to be a writer and to get your book out, because it doesn't stop with, I've written this book and I've now gotten it published. That's really kind of like the first really long pull in this really long journey. I mean, being a writer is more of a marathon, not necessarily that sprint idea. But you accomplished a big milestone by getting it published. So celebrate that. Celebrate when you write that first draft. Celebrate when you get all of the illustrations back for your children's book and you just are reveling in those illustrations. And they're so sweet and they match up exactly with the story that you had. And you can't wait to see it all together. I mean, celebrate those moments, but recognize there's more to come.
There is. So I had never considered being a podcast guest as one of my marketing things. And it was really funny timing, actually, because I asked you to be on the show thinking, you're just amazing personality and I love you and I want to talk about your books and your developmental editing. But then you told me that you have a course on how to be a podcast guest.
Yeah.
And the reason I'm telling you all of this background is then a different author who works at a publishing house and had a post about how do you build your platform as a children's book author. One of the things she had was be a podcast guest. And I'm like, oh, this is so synchronistic, this is not happening by accident. So let's talk a bit about that. Why would somebody want to be a guest on a podcast? How do they go about it? And what else do we need to know?
Well, the first thing is when you were thinking about it, your book is published. So yes, it's out and it's available, but you need your readers, whether you know who they are or you need to identify them and really get to know them and be able to write copy that's toward them. But they need to know that you have a book. You need to still talk about that. And one way is through podcasting. It's a form of media that you can, come onto a show and be interviewed. And then in some way that host is going to ask you, oh, do you have a book? Or where can people get your book? And in doing that, you have created an opportunity to get your name out in a different platform that you did not necessarily have to create or cultivate, but you got to nurture a different group because you shared goodness and value with a different audience for that host, and they got to know about you and therefore your book. So when I think about guests coming onto the show, it's really about what value they can offer my listeners. What can they do to help amplify or continue to cultivate the nice little community, the nice little pond who are a part of my listenership? And I can see that because I want to talk to that writer about what their process was, or perhaps as the conversation evolves, it might turn into ways that they have done marketing, and they share podcasts, but they share other methods that work for them too. Or maybe they share tips about the publishing path or how they handle receiving and working through edits, those kinds of things. And so, the host is looking for an opportunity to serve their audience. You are providing that solution. So when you get to know that show and you decide, is this the right show for me? You're able to contribute to that. And when you focus on being of service and adding value to that space, that will bring you back so much goodness in return, because you have focused on serving first, and then you will ultimately reap goodness because you did so.
Yeah, that's such good advice. So you're not, because I get a lot of people who want to be on this show, and they apply, and one of the things they say is like, this is me, this is my books. And I go, okay, that's terrific. But my audience is actually people who are writing or publishing or marketing. And so, yeah, maybe we can learn from you and your books, but they don't highlight why they would have any expertise to teach other authors. Rather, they want to showcase their books.
Right.
And that's not what my podcast is kind of about. So I think the way they approach that, if they approached it like slightly differently, like, for example, one author said, here's my books, and I'm part of a writing community, and it's, like so important to me. And I thought, I'm not part of a writing community. I haven't done that one. That is a good one for me to learn about. So you're right. It's kind of like the way you pitch it is quite important.
Yes.
I never thought of that.
Yes. Yes. I mean, when you take the time, and that's one of the things I created a course to help people, because there were times that when I could tell when somebody might have been, uncomfortable or trying to figure it out, and they started, and I would initially engage by saying, okay, I need some more information in order to get to a yes. So I would ask them some leading questions to get them to talk. When I had a good feeling like this would be a great person, but I need a little bit more context, or I need to assess a little bit more, that would help. When I transitioned to like a guest application form to be on the show, a lot of those leading questions are still there. It's just it's just now in a different container versus me responding each time. It's to this container that's handling that. But, when you are looking at a show, do they have guests? Do they not? What value can you offer? But are you clear who the audience is? Because there are plenty of shows that are about the latest book out. So for you to say, hey, I've just published this book, fantastic. That's focusing on the right podcast that is interested in that. But if the show is more centered around how to serve the writer in their journey along the way, then yes, the book is important, but there's other messages that are a bit more important for that show. So when you take the time to assess the right shows for you, you'll get a feel if it's the right show for you, as well as how to go about contacting that host too. And the course goes through that. It also goes through how to prepare, how to do a great job on the show, and what to do afterwards, because there's post work that you would have as a guest, and how do you manage that? Because now you've created an asset. Now you have created something that you can go and promote. Yes, the host will, but you should too, not just do one and done. Just how might you go about it to help showcase your work and showcase what that host has done also?
Oh, there's so many good things in there, that you're creating an asset. You're right. I hadn't even thought of that. And actually, I feel a bit bad sometimes that I kind of interview people and go, here's their interview. And then I think, you idiot. I'm talking to myself badly because I'm a writer. Yeah, there we are. You should be taking these, like they've got about 1,000,000,000,000,000 fantastic things they said there. I've got content for the rest of my life, just off even 15 interviews, I reckon. But we don't do that. Well, let's start again. I can only speak for me. I don't do that, Jen. And you're right. I think sometimes it is because, and I mean this genuinely, we don't sit down and actually plan out that strategy.
Right.
You don't sit down and actually go through, this is the process. For example, when I edit a podcast, I have a very strict order and strategy. Well, why do I have that? Because it makes everything like easy and I don't miss anything. But we probably wouldn't have that, particularly as an author. I should have that as a podcaster. So even I need to do the course just as a podcaster, I say. But you're right. And then the other thing, which I think was really important that you said, everything you said was super important, but that thing about assessing them properly at the beginning, because you were a nice person that somebody approached, so you drew things out of them. But, like a lot of podcasters are really, really busy and they will go by that first impact that you give them. And I must admit, I never thought, because I'm not like this normally, but when it comes to podcasting, I am so busy writing and publishing and doing and running a family that, like, if you don't get me on that first go, I go, nah, not that person. So, yeah, which is awful, but it's just the reality of it, right?
I don't think that's awful. I mean, because the other part to that is when you're the guest and you are pitching, you are showing an interest in that show, make sure it's genuine, make sure it's real, because that you can feel that. When somebody is really, when they're intrinsically motivated or when they're extrinsically motivated. And, even if I don't think it's the best pitch in the world, but I get a good feeling that I think something feels right, I'm okay with having them either. I would extend the invitation if I felt that. If I just get a feeling of, I don't know that this is it, I'm done. It's okay. And I appreciate it. I'm grateful, but I don't need to think any further on it because I've gotten the information I needed to make a decision. And that's what you're really helping the host do, is make a decision. So the way you help them make the decision to yes is by showing that you have paid attention to that show, paid attention to know how you can be of service. So it makes it easy for them to say yes.
Yeah, really valuable advice. And also people do go and listen to old podcasts like forever. Like I'm amazed when I look at my statistics and I think, I haven't put one out for a while, say over Christmas, because that's our summer period here in Australia. So we're too busy, or I'm too busy holidaying a little bit and at the beach. And then I'm looking and I'm like, where are all these hundreds of people coming from who are listening to old episodes? Because they're not old, not to them. That topic is like important and they want to hear it. So you could be, being listened to forever. And I don't know. I feel silly now for not having ever considered being a guest on a podcast. Of course, I was on your podcast. Yes. You can go listen to that. That is me being completely unprepared, not having done the course. But I imagine if I had done the course, was prepared, and I'll tell you why, because one of the things that happened when I was on your podcast is when I got off, I thought, really? Is that the topic I ended up talking about? Would I have been better off talking about something else? Now, maybe it was the right topic, but it was not. It wasn't like I didn't actually have what do I want to achieve through being on this podcast, the errors that I am always happy to share with my guests so they don't make the same ones.
Well, but again, I think that the intent was the purpose is I want to have a conversation and I want to see what comes up. And there's a commonality of having written children's books, having hosted podcasts. So what might come up from that? And when, to me, our conversation and it ended up really focusing around transformation for your reader, that's powerful. And that's such an important thing because that reminded the author of what they are capable of what they create every time, regardless of their genre. And, I think that was just as important. And you demonstrated how that shows up in different ways. So to me, it was a perfect conversation. But I also knew from what I got to know about you before the show that could very well be something that comes up because you talked about creativity, because you talked about a form of transformation. So to me, it didn't feel off topic. It didn't feel anything different. It actually felt a part of your brand. It's just how it showed up.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. Also, that's because you're a really good interviewer. So you, and that's true. And I'm going to say some nice things about myself now. I think I'm quite a good interviewer too. So, but you wouldn't believe, now don't go back and look at old episodes and try to guess who this is, but you wouldn't believe even how many people come on this podcast and other podcasts that I've run, and they're not prepared. And they will go, they do this. Like I go, like, oh my God, you're amazing at this. Tell me about that. And they go, yeah, blah, blah, blah. And I think, whoa, like, is that all you had to say about that? And I've got to draw the things out because I'm doing that. But if they had actually prepared, like that would be a very different experience. They could have led me, right? But most of the time I'm leading them. And it's just a dance. It's a dance. So I think as a podcaster, I think we would appreciate if the guests had also kind of prepared, and then it becomes this beautiful, easy process. Yeah.
Yeah. And to your point about, you may not necessarily, when you're first getting started and you're figuring out what a message might be or what your key speaking topics might be or things you could offer in particular, just even sitting down and listening to several episodes, go listen to 3 or 4, listen to them all the way so that you really get a feel for how that interviewer does things. How does it feel to be on that show? Because you'll get a sense of what they're about, how they conduct things. And that is a form of preparation. Is it still something is that all that you would do to go do a TED Talk or to go be on, national or international television or what have you? No, you do a lot more for that. But getting started, it's a great place to get started and to hone your skills and getting familiar, because you still would go watch other TED Talks or other national shows to get comfortable, figure out what do they do, how does that work. So it didn't feel like you were walking in blind. You're doing the same thing when you go and listen to that show.
Yeah, really good. Really good. Well, tell us a bit about your books, right? We're all going to go become podcasters now or podcast guests. Put that on your to-do list, people. I don't know if you want to put it above school visits or below school visits. Well, that's a different episode. But actually, it needs to be on.
If I may interject, I have to interject here because to your point about school visits, when you're doing a school visit, you are presenting, right? You have created some kind of presentation to be in front of that classroom, and more than likely multiple classrooms and or the entire, auditorium. So it's most of the student body or a bigger portion. So however you worked it out for that particular school visit, but you're up there, you're talking, you have a message, you have an intent so that you keep those children and the teachers engaged throughout the whole part. It's the same concept. So the speaking that you do for the school visits will help carry over into strengthening your experience as being a podcast guest. And the experience you have as a podcast guest will help strengthen your ability and your willingness to get in front of people when you are on your school visits. So they kind of really will support each other like that.
Wow. Now we're going to do both.
I know,
Thank
right?
you, Jen.
I know. Once that book is published, what? There's more to do.
And especially children's book authors, because, I do think we have to think of ourselves as children's book authors / maybe entertainers / educators, maybe, you know what I mean? Like we're actually creating new humans. That's how I like to think of it. When we're writing particularly for a child, we are sort of influencing and changing them. And I know we're doing that, even adult writers do that. I get it. But an adult has a different filter.
No, I do believe it's important. So, for instance, the picture book series that I have. It's called the Einstein and Moo series. It's about our two tuxedo kitties, Einstein and Moo. They're brother and sister. And this year, this April, they will be 14. So I know, right? And what I love about them is that Einstein is a very chatty little boy. He is very social. He is very, like, you could have a conversation with him. You could say, hi, Einstein. He's like, "Meh, meh, meh." And what are you doing? You know, he talks with you. He is the type of kitty that if you came over and put your purse down, he'd stick his nose in, take your pen, walk off, and then come back and give you a head buck. Like, we're good. And Mushu is the complete opposite of him. She is much more reserved. Einstein will act first and then think about what about it a little bit more. Mushu is more about, let me think about this. Let me really take some time with this. And then she does something. But when she takes the action, she's all in. When she purrs, she's louder than her brother. But she's smaller than her brother. And she is just such a little love lion. She is just a little cuddly bug. And where Einstein is, she just has a different way of doing that. And the way I look at that is, I think they're amazing. I think they're beautiful just as they are. And I think if everyone or every kitty was like Einstein, that'd be kind of boring. And if everyone or every kitty was like Mushu, that would be kind of boring. So the fact that they're so different, I think is a beautiful thing. I love the fact that they are who they are. They own who they are. They don't try to be something that they're not. And all of these things I just said are elements that I share when I go to school visits. So I talk about those very things. In fact, I'll start out sometimes with, let's talk about, when you see an animal, do you see a little personality and a little spirit? And we talk a little bit about that. Then I talk about my kitties and I show them and how I see them. Then I show them in a story. So there's a deliberate method of building to help make sure it comes through. And I remember one time at a school visit, a little girl had a little pink shirt on and it said, dancing is my superpower. And I mean, it was just precious. And when I saw her, I was like, oh, I love your shirt. She's like, dancing's my superpower. I said, guess what? We're going to talk about superpowers today. She's like, oh, I know what mine is. And I'm like, good. That's a great thing. But that's the kind of joy that I want that child to feel when they're there, when they hear it. And that's what I wanted to show with the kitties, that their own little superpowers, they own them. So we should too. We should own our own.
Yeah, that's amazing. And a perfect example of what I was just talking about. Much nicer example of what I was just talking about. But it's true, right? So it's like you said, the things that you stand for, the animals and the believing that, for kids to be themselves and to find their superpowers, that's like your brand when it comes to being a children's book author. And it comes across, like even when you interview people on the TufFish Show, you're, really soft and inquisitive and bring out the uniqueness of who they are and celebrate each person for who they are. So that then becomes your brand. And
thank you.
And you have to go out and actually show that everywhere, right? And I think a lot of authors may not know to do that. They may not actually put the pieces together of all the aspects of who they are coming across in that, in their book, in their messaging of the book. And like I said, a lot of books may not even have a message. They might just be pure entertainment, and that's okay. That's part of it
that's
too,
really
right?
what mine are. I mean, they really are just Einstein and the leaf is Einstein seeing a leaf on the back porch, and he's like, he sees some kids playing. He's like, I really have to have that. I'm not sure how I'm going to get this leaf. I'm an indoor cat. How is this happening? But I mean, and it all started because we have a back porch, and when leaves or squirrels or what have you would come on the back porch, you'd hear Einstein. I was like, buddy, what are you talking? Can you tell that sketchy leaf it needs to leave? So, I mean, it was really playing off of the joy that I saw in him. Or Mushu really loves to snuggle, and Moo in her favorite spot is her figuring out what is her favorite spot, but she already knows, but she tries different spots anyway. And, it was the sweetness of an animal, But it wasn't that there was this overt message. It was really more about just the joy and the sweetness. And, they rhyme. So they have a rhyme and a beat, and really just that joy. Now, from my standpoint, that messaging of, kind of like Seuss's wife it in when you can stand out, that same concept really is an overarching theme for me, because my podcast fits under that umbrella. My leadership book fits under that. The way I view editing fits under that. So and when I go do speaking engagements, they still are coming in from that space. I want you to let your light shine, so to speak. So how I talk about them still comes under that same thought process, because that's inherent to me.
Yeah, that's magnificent. And it really is. You've done such a good job of that.
Well, thank you.
I think one of the things that I was kind of like trying to hunt in myself for a very long time. And again, you really nailed it when you said, I've been hearing this a lot on every podcast, and I have been taking it to heart because I need to do more of this. It is the way you're saying, you just wrote a story of, joy and playfulness. And yes, there's an overarching theme, but it's not rammed down the person's throat. In fact, if the adult or the child reader can overtly see what the author's trying to do, I think the author hasn't done it well enough.
Mm-hmm.
So I definitely need to learn how to do that better. I'm a little bit of a, here it is, and because kids want to be entertained,
sure.
And then they're learning and growing along the way. And even as adults, when I watch, a really great television show, I'm probably transforming through watching the character, but it's not like you ought to be a good person and it's not right there. It's just subtle. Amazing. So just going back to the book series first. So how many books are there in the series?
There are 6 paperbacks, so 6 stories, and 1 activity book, because when my illustrator sent me the proofs, to approve for the book, she hand sketched them at first. And then once I approved them, she would start to colorize them and get them really, fleshed out for the book itself. I was coloring them. I would print them to kind of see them side by side. So creating a book for myself, if you will. But I was sitting there and coloring them after the fact. So I thought, well, if I'm coloring, somebody else might like to color too. So that's how the activity book came about. And really the stories were just because I wrote one for Einstein, and I really couldn't have just one for Einstein and not one for Moose. So she needed one. And well, I guess I should probably have one for both of them. And so it kind of evolved more like that versus this, I have this deliberate thought, because the first one really just came because it kind of dropped into my mind and I wrote it. And then that's really how a lot of the stories have happened, where they kind of formed and then they just kind of come out. So, I have a background in music. So I studied piano for 8 years. I studied voice for 4. So the metronome idea of setting a metronome and a beat, I ended up doing that after the fact, not before, and recognizing it. But I realized there was a rhyme in there. So I'm like, well, let me see if I can make it work a little bit. But it wasn't something that I said, well, I have to have this rhyme and beat. It turned into, oh, I kind of feel like I could do this, and I just need to tinker with it a little bit, if just a little bit, to have it all flow. So it's kind of worked.
Yeah, I love that you said that about the beat and the like the cadence and I mean, there's probably way better terminology for this. The musical people will know. You are one of them. But there is like a rhythm to it. Mm-hmm. And I'll often read books that don't have the rhythm, and I'll think, like it does throw something off in when I'm trying to say it, particularly out loud.
Yeah, you can hear it. But in the same breath, not all books need to have that. It's just, if that's what was resonating with you, and if you are working on your own picture book or your own story, and that's what's speaking to you, then tinker with it and see if you can feel when if it's working for you or not. And if it's not, try changing a couple of those words or try another way. I think I wrote Einstein and Moo and the Quest for the Catnip, and that was my book 3. I know that went through like 3 or 4 iterations, and it was one of the earlier pieces because it was like, it's book 3, but it was actually one of the first ones that I tried writing. I'm like, this isn't working. I conceptually understand this, but this doesn't feel right. So I walked away from it, worked on Moose Shoes, came back to it, kept moving back and forth. And I ended up showing a friend of mine who had a little one about 3 years old at the time and said, hey, do you think he could read this? And she was like, oh, with pictures? I was like, with pictures? That's great. So it was one of those that just kind of evolved. So even if you don't necessarily have the full vision, just by the sheer fact you're taking a step, it's like the light shows on the next step because you took that first step. So give yourself some grace. Going back to that grace and permission, give yourself some grace to say, okay, maybe this story is where it needs to be right now. But if I take a break from it and come back, I might see something else, or I might try something else, or I might try rewriting it and see if it does something different from another angle.
And I love the way you said, like, it depends for each author. Just got to assess what's working, because it gets me away from this is good, this is bad, this is right, this is wrong, which, can really pervade my brain as reviews have ruined my life. Please don't leave me a review unless it's a nice one. But, the reviews make you doubt yourself. And I think it's just with time you start to recognize if something's working for you. It may not work for everybody, but you as the author have to make that final decision of how that sentence is going to be, how that chapter is going to be, if it's bigger than a picture book, and then being able to take that feedback from an editor to make it all even better. But it still has to work for you as an author, right? Is that right?
It has to work for you because it's your name, it's your brand, it's your story and your vision. And even if you figured something out for one book, it might be very different for another book, and that's okay because each book is kind of like its own little thing. So it's going to need something different from you because it's a different story that you're telling. Even if it's the same characters, it's still something different. Like the Einstein and Moose series was not written in the context of you must read book 1 before you can read book 2. You can read it out of order. It's not a big deal. It's written as there's this umbrella of the series. Pick what resonates with you. And each book looked a little different, but it was still the same characters, same writer, same illustrator, but they still needed their own little tweaks for it to become its own.
Yeah, absolutely. I kind of get this sort of sense that something's finished. Like I kind of get this feeling in my body that sort of goes, finished, done. And sometimes it takes a lot of layering, what I call layering. Like I've got to go in and, get the story out. Then I've got to go in and kind of clean up the dialogue. Then I've got to get in and make sure the emotions are all rolling. Then I get in and make sure there's enough fun or kind of, interesting things happening. And I kind of layer. And then I go, done. Like it's done. Like I go to read it and I'm like, no, I'm never reading that again. If I read it one more time, I will vomit. I will puke. So I get a feeling of sort of that doneness. So then, like, let's imagine I'm done. And then do I work with a developmental editor, or should I have been working with a developmental editor as I was writing it?
Well, I believe you get your manuscript as far as you can, because the stronger you create where it is, the better you are going to get results from an editor, whomever you work with. Because if you give them the very first pass that comes out and it really needed more work, they're doing that, which is great, but it might have been something that had had a little bit more time, you might have caught that too. So, but if they're picking up on all these other pieces, they might miss some other parts because they're human. That's why you want to have multiple passes. So the more that you can do to get that first pass as strong as you can, the better it is. And you might not need a developmental editor. You might be able to move on to a line or a copy, or, go straight to copy, but line or copy, and then obviously proofread. But developmental editing, I really see that in the context of, is the story good? Is the message there? And when you think about characters, are they well developed? Is the plot strong? What I read for also is, do I see, like showing versus telling? So I'm looking to see, are all my senses getting engaged? Are there things where you might say, I am cold. Okay, but is there a way you could describe it a little bit so that I feel it too? And even with children's books, depending upon what level you're writing with, if you're getting more into chapter books or middle grade, even young adult to that point, the stronger the writing, the more you can develop it because your reader is growing with you. With the picture books, you are really looking to be concise, and you're looking to make sure you're using the right word because you really are limited on the number of words. So you want to make sure you're using the right words to depict the message. And remember that the illustration can carry a lot of the visual, and the words are necessary too. So when they're put together, then you really have a full picture that chapter books and further middle grade books and young adult and so forth, they really require more of the words because they don't have the pictures to support.
Yeah. A lot of people don't recognize that about picture books, that the pictures meant to, like, correct me if I'm wrong, like almost add and extend to the story, like not just mimic the words exactly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So for instance, in Einstein and the Leaf, there's a line where it's talking about Einstein spotting children. And there's a picture of this little cat looking out like, what's going on? But the words are there, so but the picture brings the feeling, brings the senses, and shows the children having fun. Not just children out there, children having fun. This pile of leaves, not just this one leaf. So it creates a little bit of more context where that's appropriate for a 3-year-old, a 5-year-old, even a little one who doesn't understand the words. What they're gathering is they sense the feeling, they sense the rhyme and the beat that starts to teach them a little bit more. That really does help in their learning. But a lot of what's going on with the picture book is creating a love of reading, time, attention, your time with that child. That's associating a positive feeling. And so a lot of times that's how I view my books. It's a form of creating love. It's a gift of love, a gift of attention. And, that's just like the biggest thing that when I think about a picture book, especially the ones that I've done, because that is how I have viewed them the whole way.
Have you ever developmentally edited authors from other countries or cultures? And then, does that make a difference? And the answer may be you've not, but, does it make it, have you ever done that?
I have worked with someone on her memoir, and I helped her get her first pass of her writing done because she needed some additional support. And I adore her. I think she is amazing. And I learned so much from her because we had different backgrounds. And what was so amazing was because it was different, not only did I get to learn, but because of the way that I would ask questions in the sense of saying, hey, this is what I'm taking away. If this is what you want your reader to feel or do or experience, help them through this. Or this is spot on. This is what I'm feeling with this, or what have you. It was her memoir. And, it was an amazing honor, such an honor to be able to do that with her. But yes, we have different backgrounds. And how cool is that? How awesome is that?
I love that. Yeah, I love that. And I love that, ultimately you're just sharing how you experience that. And you're asking the author, is that what experience you wanted to create in your reader? That's really powerful, actually. Really, really powerful.
Yeah, when I'm reading for a developmental edit, I'm looking for, if it's nonfiction, are you creating? You probably have an ideal reader. You should have an ideal reader. You have an idea of who you want this book for, what problem this book is solving. So have you solved it? At the end of this book, did you create an arc? So the idea of a story arc, but a transformation arc really inside nonfiction of they've started the book at one point. By the end, they should have something different because they read your book. And in memoir in particular, it is, yes, it's nonfiction, but it's storytelling too. So there's a dance that you're working through. And so I'm looking for that same transformation, but it's a little different than reading like a prescriptive nonfiction. And with fiction itself, you're starting it, you're reading your characters. Can you relate or understand these characters? Can you connect with them? Even if you don't like them, can you connect with them? But you still need to, even if you don't like them, you still want to understand them. If they're so annoying that you have to put the book down, something's a little off. But it's okay if you have a character that's not that likable yet. You want to be able to work through that. So I'm looking for those pieces. And then when I go in, I usually am inserting bigger comments along saying, this is really working. This feels good. Or right here, this is a lot more. I could write a general statement that says, hey, I think we need to go back with the layers and describe more of this. Show me the setting, show me this, bring out more of the senses. But if I can go into and show you a specific paragraph right here, that might help you to understand a bit more and then know more of what to look for. Or telling someone in their nonfiction, for instance, this feels like too much to have given your reader at this point. This needs to be broken down. How might you teach this to them differently? How might you structure this differently? Go back, rework this to help your reader in a different way. Or I don't see the reader that you said you were writing for. Go back and see if these stories, can you change the stories so that they resonate with the reader? So that's a lot of what I'm doing when I'm reading and looking at books, when I'm going through it and edit.
And it sounds like you're so nice with it. Like, I reckon I'd be a terrible editor. I'd be like, what the hell is this?
Well, I believe that author has, the sheer fact that they've chosen to, whenever they're bringing somebody else into their fold of getting that book out, there's a big trust that they're putting in that with that person. If it's a cover, if it's a layout, if it's the illustrations for a picture book, if it's an editor, no matter what kind of editor, you're still opening yourself up. And, I value that. I think that is good. And I want, especially when it's a developmental edit and they know they've gotten it as far as they can and they know it needs more. They've already said, I know I need some help, but I'm not sure how. My goal is if I think that I will serve them well, and I believe that I can serve their manuscript and serve them well, then then we decide to work together. Then my focus is, how do I help them to see that their writing is strong, and here's where we strengthen it. That my feedback is intended to strengthen what they already have done, which was create a really good starting point, not to tear it down. And so I very much keep in the mindset of it has to be kind and constructive. It has to have both. And I just think that that's really important because that person's chosen to be vulnerable with you. And what I see might not ever make it through to a published version. More than likely, some of it doesn't. And that's okay. But they needed to feel safe with someone first and know that what they did share isn't going anywhere, isn't happening any further than what that was. And that's okay.
Yeah, and it highlights to me the importance of that relationship. Does have to feel really good.
Yeah.
You need to be able to trust your editor. You need to be able to listen to them, so that it makes your work better. It isn't actually necessarily a criticism, and everything takes time and learning. I know some authors who just would never even consider a developmental edit. But, I often think, someone that gets trad published has such an advantage because they often have a lot of editing, a lot of rounds. They didn't get that straight away. In fact, I'll talk to trad publishers who are like, oh, gosh, they hated that story and I had to rework it 10 times. And I'm like, really? So it isn't, they didn't just conceive the idea a lot of the time and it was perfection from, the moment they conceived it to the moment the reader has it. There's a lot going on in there, in that space.
But in the same breath, I was working with a client one time and his comment was, I agree with about 98% of what you said, what you suggested. I said, great. I'm glad you disagreed with some of it because I want you to disagree. I want you to recognize that, yes, I know you have asked for support and I know I know I'm going to do my best to serve and to be there. But it's your book. If for some reason the feedback isn't aligning with your vision, trust yourself. Go have a conversation going, hey, I need to talk about this. You should feel like you can talk to your editor. If you don't, that's another thing. But you should feel like that. So definitely trust yourself, trust your vision. And what helps is when you've communicated the vision very clearly to the editor, this is what I'm trying to do. This is the readership. This is what I'm looking for. That helps because I know how to align to that vision versus saying, well, I think I know. No, I've heard you and I'm doing my best to get there. And if there's some sort of like, okay, I get this. Thanks, editor. Thanks for the feedback. But if it doesn't truly align, if you need to get some clarification, get it. There might be a real legit reason that you're getting that feedback. But in the same breath, maybe it's something you can go, thank you, but not right now. And just like you talked about earlier with the layers of how you write and go through that, that's still what you're doing when you're going through any other writing piece, even when you've worked with an editor, because you're probably not necessarily going through every single piece and accepting every single change all at once, even if track changes are on and it might be easy to go accept. You still want to go through and read and say, does this feel right? Is it still in alignment?
Yeah, that's really amazing advice, to still trust your own gut instinct on things.
Yeah.
But again, that's probably because you're a really good developmental editor. Do you know, like that you're actually telling people, like, don't necessarily listen to everything I say. You've got to make the final decision.
I know that I'm going to do my best and I'm going to give reasons why I think something. And I also recognize that it's not my book. And, if the writer has a certain style or the writer has a certain vision and they choose to not do that, it's not a personal thing to me. It's really them trying to do what they felt was right. And I need to honor that.
Yeah, I had this review one time for my book, The Splendid Secrets of 66 Lily Pilly Lane. And I just thought it was, well, I shouldn't say it. It was funny because the review was like, not that I was a bad author, but that my editor did a bad job. And I thought I'd never gotten one of them. Normally everyone blames the author. For some reason, this particular reviewer was like, I don't know how the editor let this book go out. I don't know how the editor, and I was like, oh, I like that. The editor's to blame, not me.
Well, so
which is silly.
It's
silly,
but looking at copy probably, and the syntax and grammar and such. And
no, it wasn't actually. It wasn't. It was because in the book starts with the little girl, your 12-year-old, in the mines, and it's very fantasy, a bit almost like a fairy tale like. But this is why it was a bit of a funny review, because she said, the social worker would never have allowed that to happen. Where was the editor during this process? And I'm thinking in my head, probably the editor told me to add that, and I would have gone, nah.
And that's okay, but that's also understanding the genre and the intent, as well.
Yeah. But I thought that was just, rather cute because, as you say, it's the author that makes that final decision, particularly when self-publishing. I don't know, maybe in trad publishing, they will not let that fly until it's fixed up. But it was just a bit cute. It's like, oh, someone finally blamed the editor, not me, but it was really me. But that's okay. Let's blame the editor. And of course, there's no one to blame because there's, like you said, no right or wrong or good or bad. It's a story, and there has to be a decision made about which way it lands, and you have to just support yourself on that decision.
Especially if you've self-published, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and you do get better with time, because I'll even go back and read an old book of mine that sells really well, and I think, oh my gosh, if I edited this now, I would change so many things. But you sometimes have to leave things in the time and the place where your brain was at that time. I'm also a strong believer of that you wrote that then, it captured an energy then. Don't necessarily go back and tinker with things if they're, okay. Just be where you are now.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I've learned so much from you today. Thank you so much for just all your expertise and knowledge and kindness and groundedness of, the writing journey and the being an author journey. It's so big and vast, and there's so many pieces to have to juggle. And we're always just learning and improving and getting, a little bit better every time. And I think I've really taken that from you today.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for having me, Eleanor. This has just been awesome. Thank you so much.
So all the links to Jen will be in the show notes to her website. You can check out her developmental editing, the TufFish Show, and also that course on how to be a good podcast guest. Yes, we're going to all be on podcasts and school visits by the end of the year. That's going to be the aim of the Children's Book Author podcast. Go do it. I say to myself first and foremost, but also to you. I hope you enjoyed today's episode, and thanks again for being on the show, Jen.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been a blast.
Did you find that interview valuable? Great! Now be an awesome human and go and leave a review, because it helps the podcast out so much. Want to read the show notes? Check out the Children's Book Author Podcast.com. Want to find out more about me, Eleanor Page? Find me at eleanorpage.com, or come and say hello on social at Eleanor Page Books. Until next time, keep writing and keep learning.